In this video, I want to create a landscape wall hanging. So I'm going to take you through the entire process of carding the wool, spinning the yarn, weaving it, and needle felting. So let's get started. First, we need to talk about the inspiration for this piece. I want to create a lavender field inspired landscape piece. I have created sort of a flower field inspired wall hanging in the past. I want to make this one a little bit bigger, and I want to have this lavender field feel to it. These are the colors that I have pulled that I want to put into the yarn. So we have more of a bluey purple, which is definitely very lavender. In fact, this is called lavender. And then we have a slightly more pinkish purple. We have a deeper purple and a reddish purple, and then a bunch of different greens here. And I think this will create a really interesting yarn. I'm not obviously trying to exactly replicate what a lavender field would look like. This is more vintage painting inspired. So I want to keep things a little bit more on the muted side instead of basically having a purple and a green, which is probably closer to what it would look like in real life. So we're going for more of a painterly look. I'm gonna grab my drum carder and we're gonna get started with carding. So for those of you who ask me which drum carder I have, I'm gonna leave a link in the description box below. This brand is called Brother Drum Carder, and I really enjoy using it. Some of you have asked why I put it directly on the drum versus feeding it through here. And I don't know if I know the official answer, except that I find that I can get it into the drum a little bit better. And when you're doing a more painterly version of a bat, it's a lot easier to place the colors exactly where you want them. If I feed them through here, I have a lot less control of where they're gonna end up on here. So that's why I do that. And I've also followed other spinners who do it this way. And so that's how I do it. All right, let's get started. Actually, before I get started, what I like to do, I have all these bins of my scrap wool. So these are like bits and pieces. And I try to always take from this bin before I go into a new piece of wool, like a more full piece of wool, because since I'm painting on the wool, it doesn't need to be full solid pieces. So I like to try to use up my scraps whenever I can. Personally, when I do my drum carding, I'm not trying at all to be very precise. I think that's the nature of the yarn that I like to create, is it is more random where the colors end up. And I like to imagine that I am just painting with wool right onto this drum. And I do it all very much just by feel. I'm looking at it, I'm deciding, do I feel like that's enough of that color? Do I want to add more? Do I want to switch colors? And I just let it flow the best that I can. Okay, I'm feeling like there's enough green on here to start, so I'm going to move on to my purple. And I'm basically just going to layer the purple on top of this, similarly to how I did the green, and I'm gonna go back and forth. I'm gonna do all my purples over top of this, and then I'll probably do more green and then more purple. And I'll keep going till I feel the drum is as filled as I can get it. Okay, I think that's about all I can pack on there. It feels like it. There's still some room, but what I'm finding is that now there's a lot of wool that's going onto this smaller drum in the back. So I think that means I'm kind of as full as I can get on there. So we're gonna go ahead and take this bat off. And see what we've got. Definitely feels nice and thick. I know that I've kind of stopped a little too early in the past with some of these bats, and so I really wanted to see how much I could pack on here, and I will try to remember to weigh this so I can see just how much wool I actually got into this bat. It feels very thick, which I'm very pleased. So here's the bat. That's the front where I stopped, and then this is the back where I had started. I'll show you a little better once I put this away. All right, so we're gonna weigh this bat. I'm gonna start in ounces just because that's what I'm used to working in terms of wool. So we have 2.7 ounces, so it's somewhere in between. 2.6, almost 2.7. Now so it's pretty close, and 75 grams. So I think that's pretty good because, like I said, the wool was starting to come off on the smaller drum. So I think that's about the max I can fit on that particular drum. Now, had I done a more linear way of creating the bat instead of this painterly way, meaning there's sections that are going to be thicker and other that are going to be thinner, if I did it more linear and longer, I probably could have fit a little bit more wool on that drum, but I think this is pretty good for this method. So I'm gonna go ahead and split this bat into smaller strips and then pre-draft it, and then I'm gonna get to spinning. So, the yarn. I have a few thoughts on this yarn. I wish I had used a little bit more of the slightly more reddish wool, which is this one. I think it would have just warmed it up a little bit. However, I still think it's a really beautiful yarn. It just maybe isn't quite as, I mean, I'm just really attracted to warm colors. I think that's where I'm coming from. So I feel that I could have used a little bit more of a warmer color mixed in there, but it's really pretty. One thing I did differently when I was carding the wool for this yarn was I actually started to use my brush on the drum forwards instead of just backwards. So there's something that I learned about that process. So when you use it backwards, the comb, what it does is it just helps push the wool onto the drum without combing the wool. But when you use it forwards, it actually combs together the fibers a little bit more. So it kind of acts as a blender brush in a way. It's basically mixing together the fibers almost as if you were carding it a second time. So that's another thing that I feel that I'm not sure I would do again, because I'm just grabbing another example of a yarn, a different yarn I've made. And this one, I didn't do that combing method. So the colors are a lot more chunky, meaning I didn't comb the fibers together as much. So that's a difference between the two. Again, still really love the yarn, still really pretty, but I do kind of like when the colors remain a bit more separated more. So you live and learn. It's still gonna be a really beautiful piece and I'm excited to make it. So that's the story of the yarn. Now, because I've made a few of these pieces before, and I found that when I weave the hand spun yarn first, and then I'm needle felting over top of it, constantly touching it, because this is a fine merino wool, it can fuzz it up a little bit. And what I would like to try this time is to actually do my needle felting process first and then weave in the hand spun after. The only thing that I will need to be keeping in mind doing it this way is just to always be glancing down at this yarn to make sure that the colors I'm using are all gonna tie in really well. I don't really see that being a problem anyway, and I can always touch up the needle felting if necessary at the end. Okay, that's enough talking. Let's get to weaving. I'm gonna be using linen warp string for this piece. I really like the natural color of it. I think it'll tie in well with the other elements of the piece. So the first thing I need to decide is how big this piece is going to be, mainly how wide. The length I can sort of play around with. I do wanna try something bigger than my previous pieces like this. So I'm thinking I'm gonna go almost the whole width of my loom, and then I'm thinking I want this piece split a little bit more half and half. So kind of half sky and background stuff, and then the other half be the foreground with the hand spun yarn. And I might also try making it so that that line isn't perfectly straight. I might kind of curve it up a little bit to add some extra interest, maybe this way. All right. I'm gonna get warping my loom. I'm just gonna do a single warp, and then I'm gonna get weaving the area that I'll be needle felting on top of. I think that's the width I'm going to stop at. So I've just done a single warp. I'm gonna tie this off, and then I'm gonna figure out how much string I need to leave at the top to wrap around my dowel. All right, so basically what I'm gonna be doing is I'm going to be weaving from this end of the loom for the first half of my weaving. And then when I'm needle felting, I can turn the loom all the way around and that's just fine. And then at the end, I'll be weaving in the hand spun yarn. So I'm gonna flip this around and I need to figure out how much to leave at the top. I pulled out a dowel that I had. So this is a 3/4 inch thick dowel. I just decided to use one that I already have. And this is just the full length of it. They come in 4-foot lengths, generally speaking, from the hardware store. And then I cut them down from there. We actually have a whole video on dowels. I'll link it right here for you. Now what I'm gonna do is just create a little faux lark's head knot so that I can figure out the length to leave at the top. So I have this on here, and then I'm gonna hold my fingers down approximately 1/2 inch. This isn't exact. I just like to leave a little bit at the top there because then it's easier to get it around the dowel. And if I weave it a little bit closer, I have some wiggle room. Then I'm gonna undo that loop and measure it. So this is about 3.5 inches. So that's how long the loop is, but what I also like to do is actually loop it around one of the pegs because I need to decide how big my cardstock that I'm gonna put in here is going to be. And I'm gonna need it to be about 3 1/8-ish inches, and I believe I already have one that is that length. And I'm just gonna weave this in with plain weave. Then I'm gonna go ahead and do all my base work. So it's going to be a twining stitch, and then I'm gonna just be weaving plain weave for the area that I want to be the needle felted portion. Since my cardstock didn't quite reach all the way across, I'm just adding in another piece. And this will come out while I'm doing some of the needle felting, but it's just going to give me something straight and solid to beat the weft down onto to make sure that I start the piece off nice and straight and I'm not having to adjust it a bunch later. Normally I use what's considered a bulky yarn for this whole weaving portion, and it is a wool acrylic blend, but I realized I have a bunch of this Briggs & Little Super, so this I think would be a bulky to super bulky weight. I have a lot of this, and I'm thinking it would be really nice to have a piece that is 100% linen, 100% cotton, some of the yarn, and 100% wool. In some of the past pieces, when I know I'm just going to be needle felting a sky, I'll do a light blue color as the background weaving portion. But I think because some of this I want potentially to be some grassy field kind of looking portions, it's probably easiest just to go with an off-white. So that gives me something that's not super stark underneath the needle felting, but it's also not going to poke through any unwanted colors. I found some that's already in a ball, so I'm gonna use this. And that's easier for me now because my Weft is occupied with the hand spun. So I'm gonna go ahead and weave this in plain weave, and I'm just gonna go by instinct in terms of how I shape this and where I end it. I'm grabbing another piece of cardstock that is the same height as this because I kind of want to have an idea as I'm weaving this of where the piece will end, because I need to leave enough at the bottom that I can tie knots underneath what will be the fringe. So I'm just going to lay this here, and I could even, you know, just kind of weave it in a little bit just to have it give me a guideline on where I need to end up. So if I want to have this piece kind of half and half, it's actually only going to go till here. So it's sometimes nice to have that visual so that you don't expect to weave all the way to the very, very end of the notches. I basically took bigger pieces of wool roving, this light blue and this light yellowish green color, and I just started needle felting all over the woven portion. So basically all I wanted to do here was get a base layer down and not needle felt it too much, because as you can see, the more you needle felt, the more the piece is going to shrink. So you can see that we have drawn in the warp strings. Now, in some ways, it's a good thing that I'm actually doing this needle felting prior to weaving the bottom, because if this shrinks a lot, I can sort of accommodate that with my hand spun yarn later. Every time I do needle felting stuff, I'm just always amazed at how for the first little bit it doesn't look like anything and you're like, is this at all the right shape? But then you get to a point where it starts to look like a thing, and that's what is happening with this little house. I was like, I don't know if this angle is right, if these shapes are right, but now that I have it more defined, I can see how it's gonna work. We're gonna have the roof over top of here as well, but I just wanted to point that out because sometimes it feels very, how do I know if I'm doing this right? And I think it's just a matter of doing it and trying to manipulate it as you go and just keep going even when it feels like, I don't know about this. There came a part of this needle felting process where I literally had to just hunker down and get it done and stop talking, because this is the largest needle felted area I have done on a piece before. And I'm still very much trying to figure out my process in terms of how I want to create clouds and how I want to create trees and all of those details. I still feel like a newbie in terms of how to create those. And so it took so long. When I did the clouds, at first I felt like they were too defined. And so in the end, I ended up softening those out. I tried to create trees that look really soft. The reality is that the yarn I created for this is a very soft, muted color. So I didn't want anything in the piece to feel too stark against that. So that's why I stayed with these more grayish blue colors for the sky. I didn't go really vibrant with it. Same with the foreground and the house. All of those details I kept more muted because I wanted them to match the yarn that I created and not feel like they clashed against it. I kind of felt like I just had to stop needle felting because I think that it's one of those processes, much like I assume it would be like if you were trying to paint a landscape, where you feel like you could just keep adding and adding and adding forever. And at some point you have to just decide that it's finished. And so I decided that it's finished for now and that I can go back and add anything else that I feel needs to happen at the end. So to weave in the yarn, I'm going to be weaving this in over 2 under 2 strings because it is a very bulky yarn. I'm also using my pickup stick because the yarn is made of a super fine merino wool and I don't want it to get very agitated by the linen warp strings. Linen is a little bit more coarse, and weaving in general is going to agitate this yarn because it's going in and out of those warp strings. So I'm just using my pickup stick to try to combat some of that. To finish off this piece, I actually ended where I would normally start. So I did a twining stitch followed by a couple rows of plain weave, and then I added my fringe on top of that. Oh my goodness, I think I'm finally ready to take this off the loom. I have a couple more ends to tuck in, but then I can take it off, and oh my goodness. This has been a long haul, but I think it was worth it. So I'm gonna finish this up and we're gonna look at the completed piece. All right, after so many hours, it's all done. So let's have a look at the finished piece. All right, let me know what you think in the comments below, and let me know what was your favorite process to see. Was it the carding, the spinning, the weaving, or the needle felting? If you enjoyed this video, check out this one next.